Okay, so looking ahead at through the slides, we had just talked about slide number 6, and it talks about oogenesis, and that is the production of oocytes, the the eggs. And then when you go to the next slide, this is the slide that slide 7 is the one where um, I think I originally would have planned to have talked about the ovarian cycle. So anyway, so you can see the developing follicles there. So you might want to reference it as well. All right, so ovulation. Let's look at slide 8. Now, what's interesting is that the egg, of course, needs to make its way from the ovary into the uterus. And yet, if you look at the ovary, it's this round structure, and then if this is the oviduct, it has this. It's sort of a bell-shaped structure that surrounds much of the ovary. Not all of it, but much of it. And so what we're looking at here on slide number 8 is you can see the oocyte that has just been ovulated. And to the right, you can see it says uterine tube and fimbriae. Now, what it is so you have this over here, and then you have fimbriae. They're like little fingers. So you have these little fingers, and so the oocyte has been ovulated right here, and these fingers are like, come on, my child, into here, into the oviduct. And so what they do is they're like little fingers that help to sweep the ovulated oocyte into the oviduct. Now, lining the oviduct, we have cells that have cilia on them, and they start producing a current. So we had said, what do cilia do in human anatomy? What do cilia do? They move materials across surfaces. That's how we defined them earlier this semester. What's the material? An egg, an oocyte, right? So you have the fimbriae that are saying, come on, my little darling, and we have this current of fluids that are helping to pull the oocyte into the oviduct. And so this is an endoscope, so it's a camera on the end of a tube that is looking at the real thing. All right, so where does the oviduct go? It goes to the uterus. So you have this tube that's leading to the uterus. Now, it's not just a passageway. When we talk about human reproduction, it has a real function. It is the site of fertilization. When I used to breed horses, in theory, the sperm will survive for 48 hours, and the egg takes a few days actually to make it to the uterus. And so occasionally I'd be working with the vet, monitoring, looking for maturity of follicles and trying to guess when they would ovulate. Occasionally you'd be just too late, a few hours too late. And the vet would say, forget it, it won't work. And I'd say, well, I've ordered this semen. I'd get semen from a stud in Oklahoma, and it would be sent to the airport, and I'd have trouble getting it always. And I would go to the vets in the middle of the freaking night as a result of that, and we would breed my mare. And the goal was to breed her just before ovulation. And if you ever did it just after ovulation, you wouldn't get fertilization. So all of the timing has to be just so. Now, that being said, on these slides, we're going to say that you have this window of opportunity of several days, but at least with artificial insemination, with artificial breeding, that isn't the case. And I think it probably has to do with the number of sperm cells that, with these studs, what they try to do is they try to only give you enough without having too much. And we'll get into that later on. So anyway, the point of all of that is what is the function of the oviduct, the fallopian tube, the uterine tube, all the same thing. What is the function of that? It's the site of fertilization and the path that is followed to the uterus. All right. So we slide 9, I already talked about when I was talking about the ovarian cycle. We had said, what does the luteinizing hormone do? It causes ovulation. And it's in response to high levels of estrogen and progesterone. And then the spent follicle, the ovulated follicle, becomes what we had called the corpus luteum. And it now, instead of producing estrogen, it is going to produce progesterone for a couple of weeks if you didn't get pregnant. All right. So let me take a quick look here down to the lining. Okay, yeah. All right, so we have our picture of the female reproductive system on slide number 10. And you can see it's talking about the uterus now. And at this point, you should be able to look and say, oh, okay, I see the ovary and I see the fallopian tube, and I can see where they connect in to the upper portions of the uterus. And they're one on either side. Now, the uterus is, the place where the baby will implant and develop. And at the very bottom, you see the cervix, and it's the lower portion with an opening. Well, it ends up that, yes, there is an opening there, and it's a group of muscles that can close it off, and it gets filled with a mucus plug on occasion. So what happens is with our ovarian cycle, during the early parts of the ovarian cycle, prior to ovulation, the cervix produces, we say it produces mucus. During the early parts of the ovarian cycle, the cervix is going to be producing a watery mucus. Now, why is that? And it's going to be open. It's so that the semen that is introduced into the vagina can make its way up through the uterus and into the oviducts for fertilization. Now, later on, after ovulation, it's the good idea to close that thing off, right? And so what happens is the cervix closes and it becomes filled with a mucus plug that isn't watery, it's mucousy. So it seals it off. Now, at this point, maybe you got pregnant. Your body doesn't know for sure for a while, of course. So it's just in case you got pregnant, it will protect the baby. So the cervix is there so it can be open when it needs to be and closed when it needs to be. All right, so on slide 11, we're talking about the endometrium. When I've been talking about the lining of the uterus, I've just said lining, but it's the endometrium. You know that from lab, right? So that inner surface of the uterus is the endometrium, and it changes over time. So what happens is under the influence of estrogen and then progesterone, we have a portion of it that's always there, the stratum basale, and then we have a portion of it that under the influence of estrogen and progesterone, it starts expanding, right? It starts expanding because maybe you're going to be a mom. Maybe you're going to get pregnant, right? You don't know. So we have this portion called the stratum functionalis, that is the portion of the uterus that is getting ready in case you got pregnant. And so it does this in response to estrogen and then progesterone. So it expands out on the assumption that you might get pregnant. Now, oh darn, you didn't get pregnant. So what happens if you didn't get pregnant? What happens is the estrogen and the progesterone dropped. Remember, we had said as soon as the corpus luteum becomes the corpus albicans, the serum, the blood, female hormones drop significantly. And so a woman enters into what we call the menstrual cycle, and she loses the stratum functionalis. The stratum basale is always there. Okay, below that, of course, we have the vagina, and the vagina is the connection to the outside. It is the location where semen will be deposited, and right up there next to the cervix, and that's why it needs to be open, because they have to make their way up all the way through the uterus and into the oviducts. It has an acidic environment. Now, the reason it's acidic is because of bacteria that are present, because it's open to the outside. And so you might wonder, I know, the whole thing of menstruation, it's hard, right? I mean, it's not something that people enjoy. But the reason for it, you might wonder, well, why on earth do we have to go through this? It's because the vagina in the cervix is open, right? And so some of these bacteria make their way up into that stratum functionalis. And there they then start to colonize the endometrium. And so in order to eliminate that and prevent uterine infections, you go through this process once a month. Okay, let me think. All right. I want to talk, let's see. All right, so I'm trying to decide. So we're talking here, we talked about the uterus, the endometrium, the vagina, and then the next slide would be the breast. I'm going to start out. We're still on slide 12. I'll come back to slide 12. I want to talk about changes that happen if you get pregnant before we move ahead.